By 1916, Europe had fallen into one of the greatest deadlocks in history. The Western Front stretched for hundreds of kilometers without meaningful movement. Both sides suffered enormous losses, yet gained almost no ground. Germany felt the strain of fighting on two fronts, while the Allies searched desperately for a breakthrough. The Battle of the Somme emerged from this desire to shatter the stalemate. The Somme offensive was not originally a British idea. In late 1915, France proposed a large joint assault, with Britain providing limited support. But when Germany launched its devastating attack on Verdun in early 1916, the entire plan shifted. France could no longer lead. The burden of the Somme fell squarely on Britain. Verdun had become a grinding machine for the French army, consuming tens of thousands of men each month. With France unable to contribute significant forces to the Somme, Britain, unprepared and inexperienced, was forced to lead a major offensive for the first time in its modern history. Lack of training, weak coordination, and inexperienced divisions foreshadowed the disaster to come. The British Army was largely composed of volunteers, men from the same neighborhood, the same workplace, even the same football club enlisted together in PALS battalions. Their catastrophic losses at the Somme explain why the battle became a lasting national trauma. British commanders believed German defenses would crumble under heavy bombardment. In reality, they faced 10 to 12 meter-deep reinforced concrete shelters and a complex layered defense system. German soldiers endured the bombardment underground, protected and ready for the attack. The artillery barrage began on June 24th and lasted a full week. The British fired 1.5 million shells, but due to poor manufacturing, nearly one-third failed to explode. As a result, large portions of the German defenses remained intact, a devastating miscalculation that would haunt the first day. British, Australian, and Canadian tunneling companies spent weeks beneath the earth, digging toward German positions. They worked in darkness, facing cave-ins and gas pockets. Beneath the lines, silent hand-to-hand clashes occurred when opposing tunnels met. At 7:20 a.m. on July 1st, 18 tons of explosives detonated under Hawthorne Ridge. It became one of the most iconic blasts of the war. But due to an order error, it was blown 10 minutes too early. German soldiers, alerted by the explosion, rushed into position and prepared for the oncoming attack. Germany stood entirely alone at the Somme. Despite being allied with the Ottoman Empire, Austria-Hungary, and Bulgaria, none could send troops to the Western Front. Distance, logistics, and the fact that each was fighting its own intense campaigns made direct support impossible. Still, their indirect influence was immense. The Ottomans tied down Russian forces. Austria-Hungary's collapse under the Brusilov offensive forced Germany to divert troops east. Balkan fronts pulled Allied divisions away. Strategically, Germany carried the entire burden alone at the Somme. British troops were instructed to advance in slow, orderly lines. High command believed the German defenses had been destroyed. In reality, German machine gun crews were fully operational, turning the exposed attackers into easy targets. July 1st, 1916 remains the darkest day in British military history. In a matter of hours, the army suffered 57,470 casualties, including 19,240 killed. Whole battalions vanished. The vulnerability of Britain's volunteer army became painfully clear.
Your heads down, lads.
MG-08 machine guns fired hundreds of rounds per minute. Emerging from their deep dugouts, German soldiers unleashed devastating fire on the advancing British lines. Every attempt to progress across open ground ended in slaughter. The Newfoundland Regiment charged with 800 men. 30 minutes later, 710 were dead or wounded. For this small dominion, it meant the near loss of an entire generation. French forces, supported by stronger artillery preparation, achieved real gains on the first day. The only meaningful Allied success on July 1st occurred on the French sector, a fact overshadowed by the British disaster. The first day of the Somme shattered Britain's volunteer army. The destruction of the PALS battalions left a lasting scar on communities across the country. A generation was lost before it had even begun to live. Heavy rains turned the battlefield into a sea of mud. The ground was so treacherous that soldiers sometimes drowned where they stood, swallowed by the mire. Unburied bodies reinforced trench walls. Rats multiplied rapidly. Sanitation collapsed. Conditions eroded morale and broke soldiers psychologically long before combat did. Medical facilities were inadequate. Even small wounds could become lethal due to infection. Morphine shortages led medics to give rum as improvised pain relief. Doctors were overwhelmed by the scale of suffering. The Battle of the Somme marked a turning point in the development of aerial reconnaissance. Aircraft now flew over the front lines to photograph enemy trenches and identify targets for the artillery. But these missions were deadly. During the summer of 1916, pilot casualty rates rose so high that they even surpassed those of some infantry units. Because aircraft had no radios at the time, pilots could not communicate directly with artillery batteries. Instead, they relied on large cloth signal panels placed on the ground by friendly units to relay firing instructions. Each panel symbol carried a specific meaning. T panel, cease fire, hold fire. L symbol, shift fire left or right. Arrow-shaped panels, target is in this direction. G panel, target hit, advance the barrage. From the open cockpit, the observers scanned the battlefield to locate these signals and determine whether artillery shells were landing on target. If corrections were needed, pilots would circle back, wait for new panels to be arranged, and then guide the gunners accordingly. Given the constant smoke, haze, and turbulence over the Somme, this system was extremely prone to error. Yet, despite its limitations, these primitive cloth symbols laid the early foundations of modern air artillery coordination. German forces applied a revolutionary tactic: elastic defense. When the front line was lost, they withdrew briefly, regrouped, and counterattacked. This flexible strategy would shape the military doctrines of the future. The catastrophe of July 1st forced the British Army to overhaul its command structure. A more decentralized and adaptive doctrine emerged, one that would eventually underpin British successes in 1917 and 1918. Some tunnels collapsed, burying entire teams alive. Gas pockets, cave-ins, and silent subterranean combat turned tunnel warfare into one of the war's darkest realities. Mark-borne tanks entered combat for the first time in history. Only 9 of the 49 deployed vehicles reached their objectives. Mechanical failures, mud, and inexperience limited their effectiveness. Despite their technical shortcomings, tanks caused panic in German lines. German reports described them as steel monsters. Somme marked the beginning of armored warfare. Sound ranging, aerial photography, and improved observation techniques were used on a large scale for the first time. These innovations evolved into the technological backbone of modern fire control. The Somme was also a logistical revolution. The British Army consumed over 6,000 tons of supplies daily. Millions of tins of food and vast quantities of ammunition had to reach the front without interruption. Increasing rain turned the battlefield into a quagmire. Tanks bogged down. Artillery pieces sank. The offensive slowed to a crawl as the front devolved into attritional warfare. Exhausted, traumatized, and surrounded by constant death, Soldiers fought as much against despair as against the enemy. Survival became the only motivation. The immense losses of the Somme pushed Germany to a historic decision. In 1917, they constructed the Hindenburg Line, a powerful defensive system signaling a shift from offensive ambitions to strategic survival. After 141 days, the Battle of the Somme officially ended. Casualties: Allies, 623,000. Germany, 465,000, more than 1 million casualties, yet the front lines barely moved. Somme became the defining tragedy of the Western Front. Somme was one of humanity's most expensive lessons. Technology, tactics, society, and military doctrine were reshaped forever. Britain lost an entire generation. Germany lost strategic initiative. And modern warfare, mechanized, industrial, relentless, was born in the mud of the Somme.